Hello and welcome to the Gaggle, where we challenge and, if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Szamuely. With me today, of course, is co-founder of the Gaggle, Peter Lavelle. So today we're going to be joined by a frequent friend and guest of the Gaggle, Hans Mahncke, and he's going to join us in a few minutes. But in the time that we have available, obviously there's all these major appointments that Trump has just, basically churned out, by the dozen every day. So what are your first impressions, Peter?
Let's not panic yet. Okay. Because Trump being the way he is, he's going to run these are loyalists. So they're going to watch for his cue. I don't see any of them trying to get ahead of the shark here, as it were. I think that that is the only kind of silver lining. Other than that, unmitigated disaster. I mean, it's obvious, okay?
Right.
And now we know is that, well, we don't really know. I mean, why was Pompeo pushed aside, Nikki Haley? Well, the conventional wisdom was they didn't want to have someone being able to pursue the presidency in 2028 that had a cabinet position. But Marco Rubio breaks that case. So, is this trying to corral JD Vance? I don't know. But at least Stefanik, all the rest of them. I mean, these are not people that we smile upon. Obviously, your
Yeah,
thoughts?
I think that what's very striking, I mean, immediately hits you in the face, is the fervently pro-Israeli angle to this, because we have
Huckabee's going to be ambassador.
Huckabee, and Huckabee is absolutely fervent. He's an evangelical Christian and he's a complete fanatic on the subject of Israel, Iran. So he's ambassador. But okay, an ambassador doesn't set policy. Stefanik, she's a neocon. She worked
Raise
for
your
Bill
hand,
Kristol.
yes or no. So
Exactly. Again, it doesn't set policy. So then we look at Marco Rubio. Now, there are people who are saying, and reasonably say, yeah, but Marco Rubio, he, in the last couple of years, he hasn't been as bad as he used to be. Yeah, he used to be a neocon, and he was the neocon's neocon, that he was the one they supported in 2016. But in the last couple of years, he hasn't been so bad. But I don't really agree with that because, first of all, he was the one who sponsored the legislation preventing an American president from withdrawing from NATO. And that was done with a view to Trump-proofing NATO. I mean, so, Rubio knew exactly what he was doing when he sponsored that legislation. And then, yes, he voted against Ukraine aid a year ago, but he did it for very, very, partisan reasons. He said, oh, there's not enough money here for the border. That was, he said, oh, yeah, well, what about our border? We got to address the border. So I'm not at all convinced that he somehow, changed his view of the world. And same with Mike Waltz. Yes, Waltz also voted against the more money for Ukraine, but he did it again on this, very partisan technical thing. Oh, well, Biden hasn't spelled out what the end game is. He hasn't told us what he intends to do. Does he intend to regime change? Does he intend to push Russia back here or push Russia back there? That's just sort of usual kind of quibbling and trying to score political points at the expense of Biden, which is what you do politically. But everything else, the whole body of all his pronouncements over the years, gives you a good sense of who Mike Waltz is. And he's the one who's going to be the closest to Trump. I mean, it's the national security advisor. He is the one who has Trump's ear.
Kristi Noem?
I don't get that one. I don't even understand. Yeah.
That's a very important job.
It is a very important job. Yeah.
I
don't get it.
Flabbergasted. I just thought, no, there has to be a correction here. There's got to be.
If you're going to give her a job, why not give her something like Secretary of the Interior? Oh, I don't.
Yeah, that would suit her considering her governorship. Yeah, that's makes sense.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, Homeland. I mean, yeah. I mean, what's the connection there? I don't see it at all. So, if again, Trump will be, he will be the president, but all the indications are that this is going to be a hawkish, neocon, interventionist administration. I think people who just think that, oh, well, somehow Trump is going to do something magical. Well, he had an opportunity. He could have appointed people who were indeed skeptical about interventionism. I mean, if you'd have put in Tulsi Gabbard at some senior level position, so okay, well, who knows how this is going to play out? And then this Pete Hesketh, who, I mean, the only thing I know about him is that he's again fervently pro-Israel. I mean, he goes to Israel, and then he comes back and just oozes all his love and adoration for Israel. And he talks about how, God gave the land to Abraham. I mean, he goes back to God gave this land to Abraham, and therefore the Palestinians should just get the hell out. This was land given to them, but to the Jews by God. I mean, that's an extremist. I mean, that's somebody who's not going to just simply change his view.
Yeah, I have to wonder how he's even going to function there. Okay, I mean, are the generals just going to keep things from him? I mean, or he's going to be hawkish enough that they'll be all happy. I mean, another thing that this is a weird group of people. Okay, First of all, most of them are showboaters. They're going to want to get their name out there. It's not going to work around Trump. It looks like many of them are going to be angling for the presidency in the future. That's maybe a reason why they have taken it. I mean, you don't give up a Senate seat on a whim.
No.
Okay? No. You don't.
No.
Being a senator is a pretty cush job. Okay?
Yeah.
Once every 6 years, the level of incumbency, the people that, if you get there once, look at Joe Biden. I mean, he stayed there for half a century.
Yeah. No guarantee you're going to get it back. I mean, so,
Jeff Sessions, ask him.
Yep, exactly.
All right. So Tom Cotton, he's going to pass. Okay. I just think there's going to be so much rivalry. I mean, Trump is going to, it's always good. It's always good to have, and I mean this in a positive way, like a court gesture, just, to mock what can you guys actually hear what you're saying to each other? You need somebody like that. But it's going to be so diffuse. There's going to be a lot of elbowing, sharp elbowing. Okay. Yeah. George and I have always talked about, being a communist party apparatchik during the Soviet Union. You have to have a certain skill set. Well, these people have a certain skill set too. They sabotage each other. They backstab each other. They lie. Okay. And given the volatility of the world that Trump's going to inherit, I mean, is this the kind of thing you want? Really?
No, I think so. I think you have a very good point about the contenders for 2028, because you obviously have J.D. Vance there, but Marco Rubio obviously will be in contention, as will Kristi Noem, as probably now will be Pete Hesketh. Pete Hesketh.
Why not?
He has certain obvious attributes. I mean, he's good looking. He has a war record. He's very articulate. I mean, he has that experience on television, so he's a very good speaker.
He's always been in the MAGA part of the party. He's like pure form. Okay, he was in Trump's camp from the get-go. The rest of them, no, they wobbled here and there, even J.D. Vance. Okay, but he had said he's pure form. Okay, so I hadn't thought about it, but I think you're absolutely right.
No, that's right. And then the question then arises: well, what about this influence? We've been hearing about the influence of Tucker Carlson, Don Jr., Tulsi, J.D. Vance. Where are their voices? I mean, in what way are any of these appointments representative of theirs? Now, you could say Musk's appointment at this, he's going to head this, Department of Government Efficiency. The problem there is, of course, it's not a real department. I mean, it's just going to be a kind of an extension of the White House, and they don't have any powers. I mean, they can't actually affect anything. I mean, if you're going to abolish some department of government, you're going to have legislation, and Musk isn't going to have any ability to push for legislation.
Thing isn't going to last 3 months. He'll get bored with it and go on to something else. Okay, the I'm sure you've seen the same reports I have. Musk is apparently essentially living at
Yeah,
Mar-a-Lago.
yeah, 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 yeah.
And he's on the phone call with Zelensky. I mean, these are
Yes,
like best friends,
yes,
okay?
yeah,
But I think he'll get bored with it, and I don't think Trump does not share the limelight. He
right.
just doesn't do that. He'll get bored, and Trump will say, I'll call you. I promise. Okay.
I agree with you. I think probably he and Vivek probably will eventually come to blows, because I imagine he'll regard himself as senior to Vivek, and Vivek himself is an entrepreneur, a CEO, a millionaire. He's not gonna take lightly to be pushed to the sidelines. And then when Musk realizes that Trump really has got other things on his plate and he can't get access. I mean, he's got all this access now, but once he's in the White House, but Musk isn't going to have all this access
Oh,
to him.
look, he can maybe call at least for the next few months. He can get his call into the West Wing, just like that. But anybody at the Pentagon going to answer the phone? Who are you?
Right,
What power do you have?
right,
What mandate do you have? You're a friend of Donald Trump for now,
right,
okay? And cutting costs? The whole point of government is to increase your
right,
budget, not to cut it, okay? And you would need the second coming to get into the Pentagon's books,
right,
okay?
right,
So
right,
good luck with that. I mean, it feels good, it sounds good, but it's foolishness, okay?
right. Yeah. All right. So anyway, Hans is here, so we'll let him in. Um, Now, taking a little bit of time, as always, with this primitive technology. But yeah, Peter, I agree. It just sounds good. Oh, well, it's going to come back. I mean, these things have been tried before. I mean, there's nothing new about Well, we're going to have smaller, leaner, more
Oh,
efficient government.
it's been refreshed on YouTube. Rand Paul had with his bar charts and all of that.
Hans, can you hear us? Hans, can you hear me?
He's connecting to his audio. There we
Okay.
go.
Hello, gentlemen.
Hello,
There.
Hans. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. Thank you very much for joining us. It's kind of early for you. Sorry about that. It's
No,
these.
not at all. Not at all. I'm always up early anyway.
Oh, okay.
I'm in Dubai most of the time, not right now, but
Oh, really?
so I'm kind of more on your time zone usually now. Yeah.
Yeah. So what you have behind you is this is your new book, Swift Boating America, and it's been published already.
It was published in mid-October, so a few
Okay,
weeks ago.
okay, great. And the book is what is yeah. Could you just tell us exactly what is the book about?
Sure. Do you want to have, are you guys recording or?
Yes, we're
Yeah.
recording.
Oh, I didn't realize that. I thought you did your intro and so on.
Yeah, I know, but we started a little early, so we're recording.
Oh, okay, got it. Swift Winning America is the story of RussiaGate, and it's the story of what really happened in RussiaGate. If you look at sort of the books that have come out, you have the sort of the official story. You have the stenographers from Washington Post put out their story, and of course Peter Strzok put out his story, and all those kinds of books. So I thought it's time to put out a book that tells the real story, what actually happened. Very importantly, I also felt everything needed to be footnoted, and preferably to primary sources. So anything that's said in there, there's a text message or there was a revelation about this or that, or we found out whatever, you can go to the footnotes and it will point you to an actual original source, usually a primary source, some kind of government document or whatever. And, at some point in the future when most people don't think about this anymore, hopefully that will be kind of a reference point where people can go and say, yeah, what exactly happened with Strzok, or what exactly happened with Papadopoulos, or what exactly happened and then you can retrace the story in the book. So that was really kind of the main idea.
Well,
Uh,
I'm really glad that you've done this, and I look forward to reading it because it has to your work has to become part of the historical record because let's face it, gentlemen, most people think that Donald Trump is colluding with Russia. I mean, RussiaGate worked. It did. It worked, and it's still working.
Yeah.
It
Yes.
does. As soon as he won re-election the other day, you saw all these tweets about from the usual
Oh,
suspects.
I mean, I hardly said anything, and I started getting attacked ferociously, and I didn't even mention anything about it. I mean, that's the one thing they went to, straight to it.
Yep. And it's that's the other thing I think that well, I've been saying for all these years, you guys have been saying for all these years, but I don't think it's kind of sunk in yet, which is that the entire thing was made up. It was all fabricated. And by the way, the book is called Swift Boating America because the Hillary Clinton campaign gave it that title. Their own project to smear Donald Trump was called their Swift Boat Project. That was the name they gave it. And of course, they're not happy with what happened with John Kerry in 2004, where this name originally came from.
Right.
They thought that was a smear. So for them to call their own project the same name that the John Kerry project had tells you that it was a smear from day one. Anyway, that was their own word for it. And the point is that everything was made up. And I don't think that this is appreciated enough. Usually when you have these hoaxes, there's kind of a kernel of truth, there's something, and then people latch onto that and invent this big story around that and so on. But that's not the case here. What we have here is 100% made up. Everything is made up. There's no kernel of truth. There's no nothing. There's no hook. There isn't anything whatsoever. And so if we can get that message across, I think that'd be great.
Well, maybe there's something, a mother lode here. And George and I have talked about it off and on recently during the campaign. Trump will have executive power on January 20th. What should he release?
Everything.
As a scholar of this, what's your wish list?
Right. No, this is a really good question. There's so many details and we can get lost in the details, and people for the most part don't care about the details, and that's fine. We know the overall story. Everyone knows the overall story now, which is that Hillary Clinton made up this plot, and then the administration, the Obama administration, co-opted it, they weaponized it, and then they use it against Trump for 4 years. That's sort of the outline of it. Of course, I'd like everything. There's so many little details about Comey leaking and this and what happened to Flynn and all these kinds of things. But if I could just choose one, I think it's the sort of untold part of this story, and that is the involvement of Barack Obama,
Right.
which is completely kind of gone under the radar. I mean, hardly anyone knows about it, hardly anyone talks about it. And despite that, we know that he was involved pretty much from the start, and he shepherded the process. And when I say process, what I mean is the hoax. He knew it was a Hillary Clinton campaign hoax. He knew that since from July of 2016 onwards. And instead of telling Hillary, look, this isn't good for our country, don't make up stuff about Russia, whoever gets to be president, we're going to have lots of problems, just cut it out. He didn't do that. He went in the opposite direction. He poured gas on that fake fire, and there are still a bunch of documents to do with July 2016 when he first found out that this was a Hillary Clinton campaign hoax. And then, of course, there was his order in November of 2016, once Trump had actually won, to turn this whole thing into kind of a giant weapon against Trump. And he co-opted the intelligence services, FBI, and so on and so forth. So and then, of course, we also have the January 2017 meeting in the Oval Office where they decide to kneecap General Flynn and so on. Anyway, what I'm saying is Obama's role has not been properly kind of described. I mean, I just gave a quick outline here, but we don't know that much. So if I could just choose one thing, it would be release everything to do with Obama's role in this RussiaGate scam.
Mm-hmm. Right. So the Obama role, it starts, I think, that July 2016 when he has this meeting with Brennan, the CIA director, and then Brennan tells him, "Oh, you know what? Hillary Clinton is trying to change the conversation from her server to Trump's supposed collusion with Putin." And Brennan, I mean, the tone of it is that Brennan thinks this is all being made up. And then, so what then happens? What at that after this meeting? What then happens? What does Obama do when Brennan tells him this?
We don't know exactly what happened in the Oval Office. We don't know what was said, but we know, as you intimate, we know what happened very shortly after. Within 72 hours of that meeting, the FBI opened its investigation into Trump, the Crossfire Hurricane investigation. I don't think that timing is a coincidence that you go straight from one thing to the other. Plus, it was this is again not really hasn't really been reported much. It was an enterprise investigation, which is a term of art within the FBI, designating it as kind of wholesome, huge, these various other aspects to why it was called enterprise. But that you do not open an enterprise investigation into the opposition candidate without Obama say so. And the fact that 3 days earlier, this meeting had taken place in the Oval Office with Brennan and Obama, I'm, pretty sure there's a direct link there. And again, this is stuff that we'd like to know more about. Probably there is no kind of transcript of what was said during that meeting, but there's probably some notes, some documents. Again, the July 28th, 2016 meeting. We know, for instance, that just came out very recently. I don't mean to digress, but just to give an example, Obama gave a briefing to journalists right before he left the White House on January 17th, 2017. That was not known until, a week ago or so. And in that briefing, he pushed this RussiaGate hoax like just crazy, push, push, push. We didn't even know there was a meeting. And the best part is there was a transcript, an actual transcript. Again, we had no idea that any of that happened. So with that in mind, yeah, maybe there is more in terms of documentary evidence as to what happened on July 28th in the Oval Office, and that should be released. But what we know for certain, coming back to your question, is that immediately led to the opening of this Crossfire Hurricane investigation. And then it immediately expanded, like basically from day one. It went, we'll open an investigation. Oh, now we're going to go after General Flynn. Then we're going to go after Paul Manafort, who was Trump's campaign manager at the time, and various other characters. And it just kept growing and growing. And then they started spying on the campaign. Now, that word is often overused, but in this case, it's exactly what they did. And they spied in all kinds of ways. They spied in terms of getting warrants for emails and so on. They spied in terms of they went to the house of Carter Page, a Trump campaign advisor, and turned that house upside down. I mean, how must that guy feel to have his privacy invaded like that? But they also did other things in terms of spying, which is on with 3 different people. They sent so-called confidential human sources to meet people to spy on them in that way and to try and entrap them. Not on 3 separate occasions, on far more occasions, but I'm talking about 3 different people that they did that to. Carter Page, George Papadopoulos, and another guy very high up, Trump foreign policy, not just advisor, but coordinator or whatever his title was, the top guy there, a guy called Sam Clovis. And the FBI sent a spy to meet Sam Clovis under some false pretense to try and get info out of him and just make up some stories. And that all happened after, Obama already knew that the whole thing was a hoax.
Well, Hans, I mean, what is the connection? Or maybe there isn't, or maybe it's been developed through time. I mean, okay, it was obviously completely made up. It's a hoax. It's a pretty outrageous claim that someone is a traitor to the potential president of the United States is a traitor to the country. Was there an awareness among some or all that this would definitely damage relations with Russia? Is that what they wanted? I mean, was it killing 2 birds with 1 stone? Or maybe because, look, I mean, I look at our ages right now. I mean, with the Cold War, the Soviet Union, I mean, all of these images easily come to mind. I mean, was there an awareness that this would happen, or is the intention it would happen?
Yeah, I'm smiling because that's basically the basic thesis of my book, and you'll see that right in chapter 1, where I start off saying, this is 2 birds with 1 stone. I mean, on the one hand, of course, try and defeat Trump at Hillary
We've
wins
spoken so
because
many times. I feel like I
smear
know
him.
your book already.
But in parallel, Trump was saying things, and if you go back to 2015 when he first started running, he was saying things very regularly and very consistently about not necessarily being friends with Russia, but he recognized that Russia was not our enemy, and certainly not in any natural sort of adversarial way. I mean, just little things like culturally, Russia is far, far closer to the United States, to Western Europe, and so on than, say, China or India or any other country like that. There, I also detail how Putin kind of underwent his own change over the years, but that was not driven by himself, but that was driven by the West. So few people know, for instance, that Putin was actually friends with Chen Qiuben, personal friends. That was the former president of Taiwan. They had all kinds of collaborations. This is just 20 years ago. This is not that long ago. This traces back to when Putin was deputy mayor of St. Petersburg and Chen Qiuben was the mayor of Taipei. So look, I don't want to digress and talk about China and this and that and whatever, but just to show you how quickly kind of the pendulum can swing. But what we keep being told is that, Putin was always against Taiwan or pro-China or whatever. And then you can say the same thing about the West. I mean, we have a lot of accounts. We have Germany's foreign chancellor, Gerhard Schröder, many other people who very clearly detail that Putin, even George W. Bush, that Putin was open to perhaps even joining NATO, but certainly not being enemies. And we're talking, 20 plus years ago. And then at every step of the way, the kind of the Western foreign policy establishment just kind of put up walls or somehow ticked him off, just did things to irk him on purpose, like the 2008 NATO declaration, like, oh, Ukraine's going to join NATO, they've been playing these games for so long. So, I mean, one of the theses of the book, the second one in terms of its foundation, other than the Hillary Clinton campaign hoax, is the idea that because Trump was saying all these things, why don't we have better relations? They couldn't let that happen. They just didn't want to let that happen. So it was kind of an insurance policy. Okay, if the first part doesn't work, that means if Hillary somehow loses against this guy, we still have the second part, which is that we would have criminalized diplomacy with Russia because of this Russia hoax. So all the stuff that Trump wants to do, where he wants to have friendly relations with Russia, or at least friendlier, where he wants to resolve the Ukraine situation. He talked a lot about that too. Because of course that no one ever talks about this. I know you guys do, but the war started not in 2022. It started in 2014. All of that Trump was hindered from doing that. He was not able to do any of the stuff that he talked about in 2015, 16 because of the Russia hoax. And yeah, I think that was absolutely on purpose.
Do you think? I mean, the official story is that the RussiaGate hoax starts on July the 31st. Oh, this Australian High Commissioner, Alexander Downer, he has a conversation with Papadopoulos and say, "Oh, I'm very, very troubled by this." He makes this call, and then it starts on July the 31st of 2016. But there's a lot of indication that it actually started long before that. So when would you say? Do you have any sense of the date at which this RussiaGate hoax began?
It's an amalgamation. There's actually a whole chapter in the book called "When Did the Russia Hoax Begin?" or "When Did Crossfire Hurricane Really Begin?" When did the investigation really begin? You're absolutely right. It did not begin on July 31st. Now, first of all, I think it's really important to note, because few people know this, there is an actual text message between Peter Strzok, the FBI's head of counterespionage, and his lover, Lisa Page, who happened to also be the counsel for the FBI's deputy director, Andy McCabe. So, high up there on the 7th floor. So these two kind of top honchos at the FBI were exchanging these text messages. And one of the text messages is from, I think, July 27th, something around that mark, but certainly before Crossfire Hurricane. And they discussed their open investigations into Trump. Well, it's right there. It's their own text messages. So obviously, yeah, they had investigations. Now, I don't think we have a date. I think it was kind of a mishmash of different things. I think they wanted to obviously target Trump for the reasons we just They knew about the Hillary Clinton campaign hoax. They had a couple of things that they could do, which I'm sure they did do. Again, that would be great to find out more. So, for instance, Paul Manafort, Trump's campaign manager, had been in, under some kind of investigation earlier, I think 2014 or so, because of his entanglements in Ukraine. By the way, do you guys have that too? I have such a pet peeve that anything to do with Ukraine is then immediately also Russia. It's Russia when they want it to be, but it's totally Ukraine on its own when they don't want it to be.
Well, I mean, I think it's I think what's been said in past podcasts. I mean, RussiaGate has preciously few Russians, but it has a lot of Ukrainians.
Very good point. Yeah. So they had that. They had Carter Page, who had actually helped the intelligence services. He was a banker in Moscow for a while. Good guy, by the way, lovely guy. They really chose the really good people that they made into their patsies that they targeted. It just really kind of irks me
and he
as
was
well.
honorable too, because I remember he was on Laura Ingraham, and she kind of made him into a bit of a fool. She even said, like, after the interview, well, my words, not the brightest bulb.
Yep.
But he was, but you remember that, George. But
Yep.
he kept his confidence. He did not say that he was an informant for, was it the CIA or the FBI?
CIA.
CIA. But he didn't say that. He didn't divulge it. Okay, and because he didn't divulge it, he kind of looked like he didn't look too bright. But he remained honorable. And when we found out later that he was an operative, I mean, that's why he came off that way.
Right, and he testified before Congress without an attorney present. And of course, they thought, what an idiot. Imagine going in without an attorney. But he said, I don't need an attorney. I'm telling the truth. And I think Laura had on that awful guy, that congressman, the one who did did the Libya thing, the guy from North Carolina with the strange
Gowdy,
hair.
Gowdy.
Yeah, that's right. Oh, what an idiot. He's a real boob. Just to imagine going in without an attorney. It was, I don't need an attorney.
Yeah, and they targeted him. And there's some evidence that they targeted him before Crossfire Hurricane, because they had these tiny little reads about, well, basically he once lived in Russia. They also targeted another.
He used to give lectures at Moscow State University talking about the positives of mostly trade.
Right.
I mean, that it wasn't, social or political. We need to, this is a vast market. It's not being tapped into enough. I mean, he was a big promoter of that, and he was very vocal about it. I mean, he was presented on Russian television. He was invited to different workshops and stuff like that. I mean, he was genuinely a good guy, a good American, and he was.
Very much so. So we have the Manafort page, we have Carter page, we have the Steele dossier, which was first funneled into the FBI on July 5th, 2016, so a month before the investigation opened, perhaps even earlier, but that's the first documented date that we have. We have Nellie Orr. So she worked for these Steele operatives called Fusion GPS. And she cooked up some of these schemes. What's often not understood about Steele is Steele didn't make up these stories in a dossier. He was fed the stories. He was told what to write about, and they just wanted to repackage it. By they, I mean the Clinton campaign, and to come from him to look legitimate or
who
whatever.
Who fed him these stories? Who fed Steele the stories?
So Nellie Orr is definitely one of them. So she was a researcher, they said. Well, by the way, her husband was one of the top guys at the DOJ at the time, Bruce Orr. So again, that's where you have another possible origin of the investigation or some kind of touch point. So we have a lot of these little things before the investigation. The stories were essentially fed by Fusion GPS. These were these dirty tricksters, the Clinton campaign operatives. So they had people who there was actually a dossier already written by a Fusion GPS guy who no one's ever heard of, which is why it wasn't so good to use that dossier. But if you look at that dossier, some people call it the proto dossier. I think that's a pretty good word actually. That was written in April of 2016, before Steele was ever hired. If you look at that one and then compare it to Steele's, there's incredible overlap. Like the P-tape story, the Moscow hotel story,
Who wrote that? Who wrote that one, the April 2016 dossier? Who wrote that?
Oh, there's a guy at Fusion GPS called Jake Berkowitz. He wrote that. There was also a sort of a Clinton roving bulldog kind of guy
Yeah,
called Cody Shearer.
that's the one I was thinking of. That because he's a longtime Clinton operative, and he was also at Brookings or something, and so I thought he
Very
had
much
something to do
so.
with that. Yeah.
Very much so, and he's related, I think, to Strobe Talbot, Brookings, all that kind of stuff. And of course, Strobe Talbot was roommates with Bill Clinton in Oxford, and on and on. They just these people all go back a long way. So yeah, Shearer wrote these mini dossiers as well, and some of that stuff also ended up in the Steele dossier. But he was more of a kind of a roving troublemaker, not directly working for Fusion. But again, the overarching point is that all of these dossier stories didn't originate with Steele. They originated with the Clinton campaign. They basically told him what to do. And at certain times, exactly what was demanded. So for instance, when the Clinton campaign wanted to roll out this Alpha Bank hoax, which is one of the dumbest hoaxes I've ever heard of, and yet the media and everyone ran with it. It's the idea that Trump had a secret communications channel where he was talking to Putin every day, and it was organized by Russia's Alpha Bank. I mean, just crazy.
Well,
Anyway,
for me, there's an extra element of absurdity to it. I used to work for Alpha Bank. Okay,
oh
so
wow,
when things would be made, it was by Mikhail Friedman.
right. And
just another oligarch. I mean, not on particularly friendly terms with Putin. Okay, so.
Right. But just Hans, so I mean, so Steele was fed this material. So where does Igor Danchenko come into that? I thought it was Danchenko who was his kind of key informant. So you're
right.
saying that Danchenko wasn't his key informant?
Sort of. Steele needed cover, but I mean, just to finish up on that
Okay.
story very quickly. So, when the Clinton campaign rolled out the Alpha Bank hoax in mid-September of 2016, they commissioned Steele to write a dossier report on Alpha Bank. Just again, all made to order. So 3 days before they rolled out this hoax, Steele produces the Alpha Bank report. So, and you have a lot of, this is the most extreme example of, order and deliver, but you have every single Steele report follows that same pattern. Igor Danchenko was basically cover for Steele. So Steele couldn't say, obviously Steele was just writing whatever the Clinton campaign wanted, but let's say, he gets found out, the whole thing blows up somehow. He's not going to take the blame. So he needed someone else. So he hired this guy, Igor Danchenko, who was a complete nobody. I mean, again, Brookings intern. I mean, how many times does Brookings come up in this story? And Danchenko didn't know anything about anything, but Steele said, look, I'm going to pay you a ticket to go to Moscow. He was paid an absolute pittance. He was given like an economy class ticket and like $2,000 or something, like pocket money. Go to Moscow and just, meet your friends and have a good time. And that's what he did. Then he came back, and then Steele had this kind of plausible deniability, or whatever you want to call it, where he could say, "Oh, it was this Danchenko guy. He told me he met all these high-ranking officials, and that's where we got this information from." Of course, all of that was totally made up, but the mere fact that he had Danchenko gave him deniability, where he could tell the FBI, "Well, nothing to do with me."
Danchenko had to give him something because he got the free trip. So, I mean, he had to cough up something. Okay.
Right. But what's interesting is that you said he was paid a pittance by Steele, but then Danchenko was paid a lot of money by the US government. The US government then took him over. The FBI took him over, made him a confidential human source, and then paid him a lot of money. So he didn't get much from Steele, but then when he was a confidential human source, I mean, then the question is, why did they take him on as a confidential human source when he obviously didn't know anything?
This is one of the craziest parts of the entire story. So he's paid something like $500,000 by the US government, when we know because of Steele, he would have done it for a few hundred. It's so crazy because he was hired by the FBI before they knew anything about him, before they had even talked to him. So this is just completely crazy. Why would they do that? Well, they identified him as Steele's super source because Steele wouldn't tell him who the super source is, because tell the FBI who the super source was, because Well, it's embarrassing. I mean, anyone, if you tell anyone that, oh, this Igor Danchenko is my source and he knows Putin's innermost secrets, you just get laughed out of the room, or you should be. So eventually, this is in December of 2016, the FBI figured out who this supposed super source was, and they must have realized just what we just said, like, oh my goodness, this guy doesn't know he's not even in Russia. He's in Washington, D.C. He doesn't know anything about it, whatever. I mean, all the world's intelligence services want to know what Putin's innermost thoughts are. And then suddenly this Brookings guy is supposed to, that doesn't fly. And then at that point, they knew they had two options. Either the whole thing just completely gets blown out of the water as a giant hoax, which it was, or they hide this guy. They have to hide him. They have to hide his existence because he is such an embarrassment. And they chose to hide him. So immediately in December of 2016, again, we have a text message that confirms this. They hired this guy without ever having met him, without knowing anything about him other than that he doesn't know anything about Putin and that he's a complete embarrassment. And by hiring him, he gets a special status as an FBI source. And as such, he is immune from all inquiries. They can basically say he does not exist. They can legally say that. So if Congress, Devin Nunes, his investigation, if he comes and says, hey, give me all your stuff, Devin Nunes had no idea that this guy existed. No one knew that this guy existed because they hid him. If Congress comes, if FOIA comes, Freedom of Information, if anyone else comes, no, we don't know anything. This guy doesn't exist. And it was actually a group of people on the internet, it was myself, a couple of others, Steve McIntyre and so on, who eventually, 4 years later in 2020, figured out who this guy was, just through kind of painstaking work, trying to figure out all the pieces of the puzzle. That was one of the biggest breakthroughs of the entire thing, not only because it exposed the Steele operation for the total scam that it was, but also the FBI.
Mm-hmm. But in terms of, I mean, this is really the nub of it. If Trump wants to expose this, then the question is there criminal liability? And I think some time ago when we had one of our conversations about this, you suggested that Comey could be in some criminal jeopardy. So could you maybe elaborate on that? Why would Comey be under criminal jeopardy?
Well, for instance, for leaking. So one of there's many. I mean, just let me give you the example of the leaking. One of the problems for the Clinton campaign was that no one was running with this dossier stuff because it was rubbish. So back in 2016, if you go back and look at the media, look at the reports and so on, it was very different from what it was just a few months later. No one talked about it. You just couldn't find any reference to it. Whereas starting in 2017, it's all they ever talked about. What changed? Well, what changed is that Comey built this elaborate scheme to legitimize the dossier and to provide the media with a hook and to leak the whole thing. This was all Comey's doing. So what Comey did is he briefed Trump on the dossier in early January of 2017, which he knew to be fraudulent anyway. Why would he brief the incoming president on something he knew to be fraudulent? Well, other than to say that it is a fraud, which of course he didn't. He pretended it was serious. Then he leaked the fact that he had briefed Trump on the dossier to CNN. I'm pretty sure to Carl Bernstein. I think Comey was trying to pretend to be like the next Mark Felt, who's going to take down a president. Why would Carl Bernstein suddenly, the Watergate guy, suddenly show up out of nowhere? I mean, he hasn't got nothing to do with any of this, especially back then. And suddenly his name appears on the byline. But it was actually a Jake Tapper article. So I think Comey leaked it to Bernstein. Bernstein then told Tapper. Tapper wrote an article. And that was published on January 10th, 2017. And then they were off to the races because that article was like, Trump briefed on secret dossier. And boom, that was the starting gun for the media. And, for 4 years, that's all we ever heard about. So that's one angle, leaking. Covering lying to Congress is another one. So they told Congress that Steele was credible when they knew the whole thing was fraudulent. There's a whole list of things they told Congress which were all lies. This was Comey's briefing of Congress. The problem with we have many instances of basically lying, that this is what it comes down to, either leaking or lying. The problem is that most of this stuff is more than 5 years old. And then you run into these statutes, into the statute of limitations, which means that you can't bring a case anymore. So you need to have some kind of act within the past 5 years to use as your hook. There are a few. I mean, we just talked about Danchenko being identified in July of 2020. Well, 5 years from that is July of 2025. So that gives us a small window of about 6 months where something could be done, because the FBI was still hiding Danchenko during 2020. They were still very likely doing a lot of dodgy and illegal things to do that, and lying about him and lying about the whole RussiaGate affair. So I think it's not going to be easy because of the 5-year time limit, but there are angles at holding people responsible. But coming back to something I said earlier, I would really like Obama's role to come out more. I mean, Comey's almost just a bit player in the bigger scheme of things. I mean, Obama is the big one here. You're not going to lock this guy up, but at least you can totally expose his role in all of this and what he did.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and we have, again, going back to with something we said earlier, Trump is will be back in the White House. Where does RussiaGate go from January 20th? Are you waiting for a new chapter in your book?
Yes, I think it does. It will go places, and you can see that from some of these appointments that Trump has made, or that he said, for instance, he was going to appoint John Ratcliffe as CIA director. I think this is huge, because John Ratcliffe, of course, was one of the few, maybe the only one, who had any courage to release anything. You know how Trump gave this broad declassification authority to various people over, various periods of time, and no one had the courage to actually do something with it. So first he gave it to Bill Barr, and then he gave it to, I think, John Durham, and we never really saw much. But towards the very end of Trump's presidency, Trump's first term, John Ratcliffe became the director of national intelligence. And he had taken a personal interest in all of this when he was in Congress. There's this video that's amazing where he absolutely tears apart Peter Strzok. So John Ratcliffe tears apart Peter Strzok in Congress. I think it's around 2018. So you could see this guy has a passion for RussiaGate. He really wants to get to the bottom of it. Then he comes in 2020, late 2020, as the incoming, or as for a very short while, as director of national intelligence, and he immediately goes to the juice. And he releases that document we talked about earlier that proves Obama's role, that Obama knew, that Obama perpetuated the hoax, and so on. That took some courage for, you're in the middle of DC, you're in the middle of the swamp, and you're shooting against Obama. You're saying, yeah, we're all talking about Christopher Steele and Comey and whatever, but it's actually Obama. So that was Ratcliffe, right? He's going to be CIA director. I mean, that's fantastic, because well, he sits on the mother lode of all these documents. He can go and release whatever he wants, and he can tell us what really happened. At a minimum, I'm sure he will go and check for himself. He will make sure that he himself knows exactly what went on.
You think this will have legs because it has Trump's mark of approval? Is it something that Trump wants, or do you think that he's just going to let it slide?
I don't think it's Trump's biggest priority. Because it's been a long while, he might not even want to be reminded of what he was put through. It's absolutely horrible. He doesn't want to remind people. He's a persuasion guy. Does he really want to keep talking about him being a Russian agent, where half the population still thinks that? So that kind of works against us. But I also think it obviously irks him that no one was held to account. So I think it's going to be a bit of a mixed bag. I don't think it's going to be the priority. I don't think everything is going to be about RussiaGate. But I do think with some of the people involved, in particular, John Ratcliffe, but there's a few others as well. There's Mike Waltz, the incoming national security advisor. There's going to be more appointments that haven't been made yet that are probably going to go in that direction as well. So I think you have enough people in there who not only have an interest in finding out what happened, and of course Trump does, and exposing the crooks, but who know the story well enough to know where to look. That's the important part. I mean, if you ask Bill Barr back in the day, or any one of these other characters, they could tell you the very broad outlines, but they'd have no idea of any of the details. Well, John Ratcliffe knows this story really, really well. He knows exactly where to look. So, yeah, I think we are going to find out a lot more, and yeah, looking forward to it.
Remember, Trump, right on towards the end of his administration, he was going to declassify everything to do with RussiaGate. What happened to those documents? Where are those documents now?
Um, there was this binder, and so-called binder, and on his last day in office, he declassified the whole binder, and it was going to be released. And then, for reasons that are just basically lack of courage, not on his part. I mean, it was a horrible time for him. I mean, he probably had a million things going on. Most of all, he was going to leave the White House within a few hours. So this was given to Mark Meadows, who was chief of staff at the time. Like, Mark, deal with it. And Mark was supposed to release this binder. And Mark Meadows got a call from DOJ saying, oh, well, we might have made a mistake. There was some privacy redactions. Maybe, why don't you send it back to us and then we'll release it? So the guy sent it back. And of course, we've never seen it. It was just there was a really horrible time, January of 2021. Meadows, total lack of courage. God knows what he was thinking.
He has a lot of problems to this day with the.
Well, yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
But I don't, even if we had the binder right now, even if it was released, I think, because so much has been said about it, I think Trump will release it, or someone will make sure that it's released. I don't think that's going to be the Holy Grail. From what I know as to how the binder came about, it was a wish list from a journalist called John Solomon. He had this, he was given the task of, hey, John, tell us the 50 things you want to know or whatever. And we've seen not the documents, but we've seen the wish list. It's a good list, but it's not, there's a lot of stuff in the weeds and so on. Like one of the things was in fact released, which was Christopher Steele's FBI interview. That was the only thing that came out of this whole binder. And that's because someone made a copy before it was sent back to the DOJ. Yeah, that's interesting, but there's nothing in there that we didn't already know. Steele lies about everything. Okay, fine. You know what? So I don't think the binder is going to have the stuff we want to know about Obama. We already talked about that. And another one we have not talked about yet is, of course, the DNC hack, which I've always called the holy grail of everything, because that's how it all started. That's how this whole Russia started. Russia hacked the DNC, even though there has never been any shred of evidence that that actually happened. And we haven't even seen any technical data. There's nothing other than the say-so of the government that Russia hacked the DNC.
And I was wondering just on that point. Now, Julian Assange, when he came to this deal, was there a deal struck with Assange, do you think, that he would keep quiet about the whole of the hack? Because he's the one person who would absolutely know what was the source of the DNC messages. But he hasn't said anything, and no one's asked him anything. And so I wonder whether is that an avenue that's possible to explore? Getting really the truth from Julian Assange.
Yeah, it would be, but I don't think he will say. I mean, he is very honorable, especially as a journalist. He's just not going to say. I think he's already said, wait, he was under so much pressure being, cooped up in that embassy and so on. He almost said too much, where he said it wasn't a state actor. And that's already saying too much if you look at it sort of from a journalistic point of view, where you don't say anything at all about your sources. I don't think we'll hear anything from him. I don't think they had an agreement in any explicit way, but certainly an implicit way that, yeah, Julian, we're going to let you go, but you just go sail off into the sunset and be quiet. And if you're not, we're going to come after you again. I think it was more along those lines. But I think the beauty is we don't need Julian Assange to find out what happened with the DNC hack. The details are in. Look, I'm not an IT guy, but I know enough IT people who've told me exactly what they need in order to figure this out. You need some underlying data related to the hacking.
Well, I think it was Bill Binney. He gave the most reasonable explanation, and you cannot even question that man's credentials. I mean, he essentially invented all of this. Okay,
right.
So I don't know how he's doing right now. I think he had both his legs amputated, unfortunately. Yeah.
Mm.
From a
Oh
very,
man,
very obscure disease that is just,
so sorry.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
interesting, right?
I mean,
he did spell
kind
it
of
out.
very strange too
Right.
itself.
Right. Yeah.
Because you know where this is leading, right? If we can prove, look, I know in various ways that Russia did not hack the DNC. There's all kinds of reasons why that did not happen. Maybe the most obvious one is that they were the first to be blamed without any evidence. So, but just think, what would happen if we could prove beyond any doubt that Russia had nothing to do with it? This entire narrative would just collapse because that's the one thing they always hold on to. Oh, well, Steele, yeah, Steele's got problems or this got problems, whatever. But Russia hacked the DNC. I mean, this has been like regurgitated so many times. So if we can tackle that one, get rid of that one, I think we'd make a huge leap forward. So, but that's going to take not like Trump saying something or some guy asking for it. That's going to take a lot of detailed knowledge as to what exactly needs to be released and how much of that needs to be released and so on. But yeah, I'm hopeful we'll get there.
Mhm.
Yeah, well, Trump will have the NSA. I mean, that's going to be maybe there's not a lot of people, a small number of like I guess will always be wondering, well, why don't you make a call and give me an answer? What happened there? Okay,
Right.
they have the data. They have the data.
Yeah.
One
Yeah.
way, either there is no data or there is data, and and you can draw conclusions from that. But I mean, it certainly doesn't look like a hack. That was an enormous amount of information to be going over to the internet. It's much better with a flash drive.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. No, that's right. Could we now maybe segue to the Jack Smith? There's news today that Jack Smith is resigning. He's going to leave his position before Trump takes office. So now the question is, well, what's Jack Smith? Is Jack Smith going to file a report? And then there's the other question is, well, what is there going to be an investigation of Jack Smith, prosecutorial abuse? Weaponization of the DOJ, which the Republicans in Congress have promised. And then we'll see. Well, is Trump going to get the DOJ to investigate everything that happened during the Jack Smith investigation?
My guess is not, but would be great if it did happen. Starting with
wouldn't Trump just want it to go away?
The problem is there. Some of Trump's people there did some really stupid things. And maybe he doesn't want to be reminded of that. We have to remember that this whole thing started before Jack Smith. It started with this raid at Mar-a-Lago. There was no Jack Smith when that happened. I mean, that was an incredible abuse. I mean, just unbelievable. We were talking earlier about going through Carter Page's personal belongings. Well, they actually went through Trump's personal belongings, his bedroom, his office, everything. They rummaged through all the boxes, Melania stuff, Barron stuff. I mean, just unbelievable what they did in terms of invasion of privacy and so on. And just the idea that they would go and raid this guy's house with a giant team is sickening. And it should, of course, be investigated as to how we ever got there. And again, this is before Jack Smith. And then they ramped it up when after that, they said, oh, we found these documents. Well, now we need to have a special counsel. And they got Jack Smith. I think it will just be one of those things that fades away. And for various reasons. I think it's one of those where we don't really we know everything was weaponized against Trump, but there isn't like a bigger scheme behind it, like in RussiaGate, like we've talked about that had geopolitical implications and on and on and on. This one is just kind of we hate Trump, we're going to get Trump, we're going to do awful things to Trump. It's very difficult. That's one thing. The other thing is very difficult to hold Jack Smith personally accountable or criminally accountable or whatever, because he's got so many layers of stuff that he can hide behind. His team, various regulations to do a special counsel, Merrick Garland, the appointment, on and on and on. It's extremely difficult to break through that. And lastly, as I kind of said already, they, if I say they opened the door, Trump's lawyers opened the door to the raid, that's a bit of an overstatement. It's not, they, they did something stupid. That stupid thing they did should not have led to a raid, but they did do something stupid, which I think we've talked about on a previous show. The stupid thing they did was they signed.
Gentlemen, I'm sorry. I'm going to have to leave right now. I have another podcast I promised I would do. But Hans, I didn't even know you were going to be here today, and I'm really glad that we did this. Okay, and next time we meet, you tell me what the next chapter of RussiaGate is.
Hey, could I hold you over for a few minutes, Hans? Because there's a couple of other things I want to raise.
Of course.
Bye, Peter. Yes, continue what you were saying. The stupid thing was the subpoena.
That's right. The government sent a subpoena for some files to Trump, and I keep saying it's really his lawyers. What does he know? I mean, he's not a lawyer. He just has this team of people, and they should have told the government to go somewhere and shove it. At a minimum, they should have argued about it, and they should have talked about the legality of it. I mean, there's so many things you could have done, but they very stupidly, and this was the one big mistake, they signed what's called a certification. So they certified that everything had been done in accordance with the subpoena. Everything had been handed over. That's an extremely, extremely stupid thing to do, because then you're the one who's suddenly in the responsibility. You've loaded all that responsibility on yourself, where you have now sworn under oath that you've done everything, you've complied with everything. Well, that can, even if you think you did, and I think they probably did think they did, it's so easy to find something that wasn't done. It's so once you give this whole sale document that they sent, we handed over everything, everything's been looked at, everything fine, it's so easy to go in there and say, no, you didn't. Look, we found this, we found that, whatever. And this is exactly what they used to get the warrant for the raid, where they said, well, look, they signed a subpoena certification saying that they had handed everything over. But in fact, they did not hand everything over because, we found out there was this one document or this or that or whatever. And you just don't do that. That's my point. You just never sign one of these things. You simply just don't do it. You argue, you delay, whatever. You tell them just forget about it, just ignore them. That's another one. So without signing that document, there couldn't have been a raid, because as much as the justice system has been corrupted, I don't think that magistrate would have signed off on it. And he was terrible, by the way, but he would not have signed off on it without that certification. So does Trump want to be reminded of that whole saga? My guess is not.
Well, but why would experienced lawyers sign off on this? I mean, isn't that, that's I mean, you would have thought a lawyer would that's the first thing a lawyer would think of. Hey, if I sign this, I'm on the hook of having certified this. So, why would they do that?
Well, not trying to be personal or whatever, I'm sure they're all lovely people, but the team he had back then, let's say, wasn't, we're talking 2022, wasn't perhaps, your top level legal team. And that's not his fault. Remember that he was totally ostracized. I mean, anyone who worked for him as a lawyer suddenly had their own law license under threat, because they were then had complaints at the bar and so on to get disbarred. And a bunch of them did, just simply for having represented Donald Trump. So a lot of good lawyers would have said, no, I'm not doing this, sorry, and then he ended up with maybe ones that aren't, that great. So I think that's probably your explanation there.
Right. I suppose there's still a question, though, where the way this whole documents case was initiated. Isn't there some aspect, wasn't that prosecutorial abuse? I mean, the way the National Archives colluded with the Justice Department and moved to make it a criminal matter rather than try to resolve this by normal means. Why did they immediately go down this path of launching a criminal investigation?
Well, because they wanted to get him. That was their
Right.
plan. I
Well,
mean, this is,
but is that something that one can, is that, oh, I don't know, whether, isn't it at least prosecutorial abuse?
it is, but these are very difficult to prove and very difficult to convict. And by the way, this is a more fundamental problem is that all of these cases end up back in DC. And what was the vote in DC? Kamala got what, like 95, 96% or something? That's your jury pool.
Right.
So my hope is that Trump will focus on those bigger questions. So the bigger question being not his personal case or going after Jack Smith or whatever, but fixing this totally unfair situation where every time any case to do with the government comes before a court, it's before a jury that is just absolutely hopelessly biased. Just look at the election results. And it has always been. That's the other thing. Why is this not being fixed in the past, 50 plus years? When you look at Nixon, I mean, I love this one statistic. Nixon won the biggest landslide of all time. And people say it was Reagan or whatever. No, but it was actually Nixon in 72. It was just an incredible landslide.
Right.
And if you look at Washington, D.C. in 1972, biggest landslide of all time, it's still something like 80-20 or 85-15 or something like that, where Nixon lost really, really, really badly. And that just tells you the Washington, D.C. problem has always been a massive problem. And how can anyone fair-minded say that this is a good idea, that people should be judged by those juries that choose Kamala by a factor of 20-1? That's not a jury of your peers. This is like North Korea. You don't want that. And if the focus was on fixing that, that'd be a lot better for the long run than anything else. Now, you could, there's all kinds of ways of doing it. Some of them would have to be through legislation. For instance, you could assign cases to random jurisdictions. You could assign cases to the jurisdictions where the people affected actually live. So like if they came after General Flynn again, they'd have to go to, I don't know where he is now, Florida or something, instead of DC. Right. If they came after, there's all kinds of ways of dealing with it. But you have to fix, and by fix, basically you have to burn down this entire rigged jury system in DC. I mean, we talked earlier about RussiaGate. These cases were lost. The cases that the few cases that were brought were lost because of the jury. That's as simple as that. When the Clinton campaign lawyer got acquitted, the jury foreperson went to the media on the same day and said, well, we're not going to convict anyone of lying to the FBI. That's not going to happen. This is Washington, D.C.
Right. So, that's very interesting because, of course, that helps to explain the Watergate prosecutions, which were universally successful. I mean, every case that they brought against the Watergate defendants was successful. They were, they were all convicted, and no one really ever thought at the time, yeah, but you have an unfair system. You have an unfair jury pool. Of course, they're going to convict everybody from the Republican Nixon administration. So, I mean, you would then suggest what, but just basically, abolish the DC circuit, just simply move every case out somewhere else?
Correct. I mean, you could get rid of the federal court. Well, it's a bit more difficult than that, but the idea would be to get rid of the federal courts in DC. Now, you still need the local courts. There's always some confusion, but you have the two-tier system. Normally, there's no confusion because you got the state courts and the federal courts. And DC, it's a bit of because DC isn't a state. There's it's a bit more complicated, but you do need some kind of court. So you need to keep the state, even though it's not a state court, but you need to keep that one for local matters. But the idea that any federal matter has to be dealt with in DC, right, is just not, why should that be? Look at all the January 6th defendants. They're running into the exact same problem, and not many of them did in fact try and get their cases moved elsewhere, and never happened. So that should be super high on the list because, well, look, we're both old enough to know that politics is a seesaw, and eventually there will be another Democrat, and eventually as president, and eventually they'll try lawfare again. They'll try this whole game again with DC and so on. And so it's much more important in the long run to try and fix that.
Yes. Yeah, no, absolutely. And you have to keep in mind that if Trump had lost this election, he'd be spending the rest of his life in prison. I mean, there's no question. I mean, I think that the January the 6th case, I think, would have some version of it. I mean, you know, you take out some of the stuff that the Supreme Court said you take out, but some version of it would be used against Trump. He would be convicted, and he would go to prison. Same thing obviously goes to when on the Manhattan case. I mean, if he had lost, Bashar would have sent him to prison. But that's another thing. You know, in addition to the D.C., I mean, you got something like New York. I mean, you have cases in New York, a ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous case. I mean, this thing with the Merchant case with the Stormy Daniels, and then the case that was the civil case, the two civil cases. You had the one brought by Big Tish James. James, is that her surname?
Yeah.
Tish James, yeah, Big Tish James, and of course they had the nutcase woman who claimed 30 years ago that she was sexually assaulted by Trump. And these are ridiculous cases, and yet in each of them, Trump lost. I mean, you know, there really is, you know, something has to be done. I mean, this is a total abuse of any kind of a legal or judicial system. I mean, I know somebody has to step in and deal with this problem because, you know, basically, people, people who are politically unpopular just get convicted irrespective of the probity of the case.
Very much so. And I would say in the New York cases, and perhaps also in the Georgia cases or case, you need maybe to set an example. So, I mean, I know I argued earlier that setting an example with Jack Smith is probably not a good idea because you just get bogged down and he's got so many defenses. And in the end, it's better just to fix the DC court system. But you cannot fix the state courts because or the state jury system or whatever, because that's not federal. That's what it is. So there, I think you do have to set an example and send a message by going after some of these people and what they did. The New York, the case that you mentioned about this crazy woman, E. Jean Carroll.
E. Jean Carroll.
The one aspect about that case that doesn't get talked much about much, which just drives me completely nuts, is that they changed the law to get Trump. As you say, this happened all like more than 30 years ago. You know, we can't even get James Comey because all of his misdeeds were more than 5 years ago.
Right.
It's done. So it would have been the same in New York, but they changed the law retroactively, changed the law specifically to get Trump, so that they turned the clock back in order to be able to bring this case against him. This is something that, you know, anyone who's studied law, anyone, even people who have not studied, know nothing about law, know is fundamentally wrong. You cannot change the law after the fact, retroactively, so that it affects something that you know now, but that wasn't the case back then, or that wasn't the law back then. I don't even think they do that in dictatorships. They have other methods, but it's just, it goes so against everything that we associate with law.
Right.
That whatever the law is now applies to what happens now. But if you later change the law, it cannot apply to something that happened in the past. And that's exactly what they did to him. And yeah, I don't think that gets talked about enough. And I do think that needs to be, there must be some way of holding those people to account. I haven't looked into the details, but so yeah, I think for those ones, Fani Willis and Georgia as well. I mean, okay, they didn't change the law retroactively, but that was a huge abuse of prosecutorial power. Unfortunately, I think that might have to happen on a state level. Whatever comes in terms of whatever penalties, whatever example we set, but. Yeah, I feel much stronger about those cases than about the Jack Smith matter. As I said, mainly for practical reasons. I mean, it's almost, I cannot think of any way that you could successfully go after Jack Smith. So, okay, don't do it, and just instead go for the system.
Right. No, I think so. But it is a little frustrating. I mean, let's say you got this Big Tish James, who really concocted this absolutely nonsensical case. I mean, it is an equivalent of RussiaGate. I mean, a fraud. She comes up with a fraud when nobody is being defrauded and nobody is complaining that they've been defrauded, and and no one had ever used the law the way she used it to to go after alleged fraud, and then they hit him with a $500 million fine. You kind of wonder, is there a mechanism? And I don't think just, oh, well, maybe the New York Court of Appeals will step in and whatever, but is there some kind of a mechanism to prevent this kind of abuses in the future? I mean, can the US Supreme Court can step in, for instance?
No, probably not. I mean, you'd have to, I mean, one way would be to try and get her debarred, get her law license revoked, what they tried to do to Trump's lawyers for all the abuses she perpetrated. But ultimately, I mean, it's also difficult. I mean, I was saying I'd rather them go after those people than Jack Smith for the reasons I mentioned. But ultimately, it's also very difficult going after these people because what she can always say is, "Oh, but the jury agreed, so it couldn't have been wrong," And then you get to square one, which is this rigged jury system in those places.
Right.
The idea of a jury of your peers really needs to be re-examined because they really do need to be peers. And I mean, look at what happened with poor Mark Stein in a DC court. He was found liable for defamation because he had said that this hockey stick graph for global warming is a fraud. He didn't even say fraud, I'm not sure. But anyway, he said that the graph just doesn't check out. And it doesn't. I mean, it's just a fact that it doesn't check out. But forget about all of that. Just I followed that trial very closely because it was just the biggest no-brainer ever. And I just couldn't believe that it was even in a courtroom. Under the defamation laws, you can only defame someone if you actually believe that what you say is untrue.
Untrue, exactly.
So forget about anyone's personal views on global warming, climate change. Just forget about all of that.
Right.
There can be no doubt whatsoever. I mean, we've both followed and watched him probably for like 20, 30. I remember reading Mark Stein so many years ago. What an amazing writer. What an amazing guy. There can be no doubt whatsoever that in his own mind, he does believe the whole thing is a hoax. Right. That's just his belief. Right. So there can be no doubt that he couldn't have defamed anyone by saying it's a hoax because that's what he actually believes. It's like it's an absolute no-brainer. And yet within, I don't know, it took them less than an hour or so, the jury comes back, guilty, boom. You can't have a rule of law country within those confines. You cannot, that cannot happen because, by the way, they dragged him in front of a DC court because they knew that's where they're going to have this kind of jury, even though he's got nothing to do with DC, doesn't live there, has not, I don't even think he's American.
No, he's a Canadian.
They did that to him.
Yeah. No, that's the thing. That's the problem, that you have the system precisely in Manhattan, in DC, and maybe in places like Atlanta, that it does really need some reform, because then you basically say, you've got a two-tier justice system where certain kinds of people can never have justice because they know whatever you do, however ridiculous the case is, you will be convicted. You basically, they've got the jury, and that jury is going to find for the prosecution.
And maybe it is what you mentioned earlier. Maybe it is ultimately through the Supreme Court, not in a specific case. Because the Supreme Court can't rule on a state matter in any kind of factual way or whatever. But what they could do, again, this is kind of thinking ahead here long term, is perhaps find that this whole jury system is broken because it doesn't afford equal protection. So then you go back to a constitutional norm. And so they could come down with some kind of judgment, which would then apply to state laws as well. Would just filter through the entire jurisdiction, the entire country, where we cannot do juries the way they've always been done because they do not afford equal protection, which is a constitutional right. That would be, in very, very broad terms, the approach.
Right. Because you would think that the Supreme Court justice, somebody like Roberts, the one thing he really does care about is the rule of law, and that the judiciary should be respected. I mean, he's talked a lot about that. He thought that Trump wasn't doing enough to ensure respect for the judicial system. And so when he sees this, he thinks, hey, this is bringing the rule of law into disrepute. So you think that, he would want to do something like that. I mean, this is because this is something he really cares about.
You'd hope so. And maybe we will see some action on that point. My fear is that we won't, because everyone will say, "Well, look, the system righted itself. They elected Trump, re-elected Trump. No one would have thought it possible. So the system works. It's fine. Nothing to we don't have to worry about it." And then, of course, what we mentioned here a few moments ago. Eventually, you'll get another Democrat president. You'll get another super radical attorney general. And then you've got all these problems come back at you. So the time, I think, I really feel this is our once, not only in a generation, I mean, more than a generation opportunity, lifetime, maybe several lifetimes, to actually fix things, or to plot a path of fixing things. If it doesn't happen in the next, I wouldn't even say 4 years, it really has to be sort of the next year, maybe two. It's not going to happen. And that's so important. And I say only 1 or 2 instead of 4 years, because again, George, we've been around long enough to know that there will be hoaxes, there will be things that Trump will trip up over, there will be so-called scandals, there will all be all this kind of stuff. So if you wait too long, you've kind of lost your political capital, and then nothing is going to get done. I mean, frankly, most of everything has to get done right now in the first few months.
Absolutely, because in 18 months, we've got another election on our hands. The margin in the House is very, very small for the Republicans. Very good chance the Democrats are going to take back the House in 26. And then we're back on the impeachment thing. First thing you're going to do is go for an impeachment. So, and then that's it. We're going to be bogged down with the impeachment and the hearings and Trump's lawyers and so on. And the momentum that you talk about, that's going to be gone. But anyway, Hans, thank you so much for giving us your insights and your time, and really, fascinating. So, Swift Boating America, this is your book. How do people get it? Through Amazon, or is there any other way we can get it?
Yeah, I think Amazon is probably the easiest way of doing that. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks so much, Hans, and look forward to seeing you again very soon. All the best.
Thanks for having me.